Good evening, everyone. This is your evening news recap, your nightly news podcast on all the news that I come across throughout the day, giving you my take as somebody who aspires to be a politician in the near future. Hopefully, all you guys are doing wonderful. Hopefully, all you guys are doing well. It's been an interesting day in the news world so far, and today is February 25th. It is Thursday. Hopefully, all you guys are having a wonderful week so far. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. All the support would be greatly appreciated as we are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube by this summer. And if you're on Substack, please consider subscribing as well. It's $8 a month. All funds go to me. Helps me pay for the things that I need to pay for in my life, like my groceries, clothing, and all of that. Outside of that, though, I'm doing pretty solid today, and I hope all of you guys are feeling the same. And let's get into today's episode. I have a fat pimple in the middle of my head, and it is really bothering me. But I mean, what are you gonna do about it? I'm not gonna pop it and scar myself, right? Anyways, moving on into our headline for today from our headlines and history. The headline we have from today is from February 25th of 1981 and is titled Prince Charles to Wed 19-year-old family friend. Buckingham Palace announced the engagement of Prince Charles and Lady Diana Spencer, a hardworking London kindergarten teacher, the Times reported, with an impeccable social background suitable for someone who may one day be queen. The couple wed that summer but divorced in 1996. Diana died the following year. Charles later married Camilla Parker Bowles. The three were famously involved in a love triangle during Diana and Charles's marriage. Of course, this is about the royal family, something I know very little about. I've talked about that before. I've never really had an interest in the royal family. In all honesty, I know very little about it. I didn't even know Prince Charles was married twice. Is that a bad thing? Probably. But in all honesty, I had no clue. Outside of that, though, he's not even prince anymore. He's king, right? Which is interesting as well. But hey, that's that for today. Again, I really just have no interest at all in the royal family. I get that they're an important part of history, and all the different lineages are, and they play this part of a role in global politics and all of that. But like, I really just I don't care. I'm gonna be honest. I could care less about the royal family. That is not something that interests me. Out of all the things that I would like to interest in my free time, the royal family is just not one of those things. No offense to anyone who is super into the royal family. It's just not something that's for me. Anyways, moving on into our highlight for today, I want to cover the State of the Union address. Of course, that happened last night. Last night, I watched the State of the Union address from Trump, and a lot went down. But most of it was as expected, right? Plain and simple. This felt like a MAGA rally. Trump received multiple standing ovations before entering the room. There were USA chants from Republican lawmakers the entire time. He received multiple standing ovations the entire time. And he gave us the same speech he does every single time, touting his accomplishments, right? Many Democratic lawmakers did show up, despite also leaving throughout the speech. And, interestingly enough, Thomas Massey, the Republican lawmaker who has essentially sided with Democratic lawmakers a lot as of recently, decided to sit with those Democratic lawmakers. Representative Al Green was escorted out of the building before Trump entered for holding a sign that said, "Black people aren't apes." Trump opened this speech by saying the country was back bigger than ever and stronger before, calling it a turnaround for the ages. He also had a very interesting quote saying that under his administration, the government belonged to the people and not the powerful. I think we all know how much of a lie that is. And this was also the longest union address in the country's history, the previous record being held by Trump as well, from his State of the Union address from March of last year. I believe it was in March. If not, it was in late February as well. Um, if you want to waste around 2 hours of your time, go ahead and watch this. But it's really not worth it. It's nothing new, right? It's all the things that Trump says 24/7, really. He brought up transgender people. He brought up, the border. He brought up the tariffs. He brought up all of the things, right? It's all. If you really want to know what Trump said, you can go and scroll in his True Social account and find one of his rants, and it'll tell you exactly that, right? I think it would have said a lot and done a lot more if Democratic lawmakers didn't show up to this event at all. I don't know why they even showed up in the first place. To me, that is just dumb. Like, if they really want to make a stand, why are you showing up to the State of the Union for a president who is very clearly not caring about the union, right? And I'm very sure that they knew this wasn't going to be a typical State of the Union address. It was going to be a typical Trump speech, yet they showed up anyways. And, I think that that's just stupid. It would have been a way more powerful message, if they didn't show up at all, rather than interrupting the man throughout the thing over and over again. They're not very good at being effective. What do you expect? But how many more times are they going to have to interrupt people on the floor before they realize that there are just better ways at going about things? Like, you know, I really hate this era of politics where we're more focused on, interrupting and yelling at, our political peers, instead of, making a statement by not showing up at all, or, just, like, there are just so many better things to do than yelling at those around you, right? And, it's something we've seen in politics since Trump has come into office, right? He really did start the age of yelling at your political opponents. There's a lot less respect in politics than there used to be. Back, what, 12 years ago at this? No, not 12 years ago, 10 years ago at this point, give or take, right? And it's just, I don't know. It's sad. It really is sad, to see that that is the case, and it's something that I wish we could go back to. I hope we can go back to. By the time I make it into office, I would love for us to be back in that era, because just yelling at the people that are not in agreement with you does not get anything done, right? I can yell at somebody for disagreeing with me all I want, but at the end of the day, what am I doing by yelling at that person? I'm not convincing them. I'm not, getting them to see my side of the story. I'm just making them think that I'm a piece of shit because I'm yelling straight up to their face, right? Yelling does nothing at the end of the day. And I wish more Democratic lawmakers would realize that. I wish more Republican lawmakers would realize that. It's a problem on both sides. But I don't know. I hate the era of politics we are in. When I am a politician, I hope that we can rebuild it and get us to an era of respect. An era of kindness in a way. I think there's just a lot of respect, or a lot of lack of respect for colleagues within both sides of the aisle. And I don't like both parties. I'm going to be completely honest. I've said this time and time again. Not a fan of either the Democratic or Republican Party, right? But I mean, we can do better than yelling at each other, and I don't know. I feel like I'm rambling at this point. Let's move on. Moving on into the Epstein files, we have one topic here for today, as Larry Summers has officially left Harvard. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary and one-time Harvard president Larry Summers is retiring and is leaving his role at Harvard following the review of his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. Harvard said Summers will resign as co-director of the Mossavar Rahami Center of Business and the government, and will retire from his other academic and faculty posts with the school. This, of course, is good news. And if they find anything in this investigation, I hope they report it to authorities and he is prosecuted, right? You know, it's about time we see some arrests, something in this country in relations to the Epstein files, because if the rest of the world can do it, we should too. And I have a feeling, and this is not saying I'm going to do it, but I have, just a small feeling with the amount of, lack of care, about the prosecutions, the lack of care of dealing with the people in these files. There's just a small feeling in me we're going to see, somebody pull a Mangione because of, the files, right? And I'm not saying that that's going to happen for sure, but knowing this country, knowing the things that a majority of Americans have access to, knowing how Americans get when they're pretty fed up with these kinds of things, you go back, you look at it, historically speaking, something Americans would do, right? And I wouldn't be shocked to see that to be the case if we do not see some arrests or some prosecutions in this country. Am I going to advocate that? Yes, but I'm not going to do it. It's not going to be me, because that's not something I want to do. I don't want to kill another person respectfully. Granted, they are pedophiles, but I don't know that I should be saying that on the internet. So we're going to say that that is something that I would never do. I am not interested. Actually, the idea of killing somebody terrifies me. That is nothing I am ever interested in. Yeah, and that's that. We're gonna move on from that one right there, right? We're gonna move on before I dig myself in a hole I don't want to be in. Anyways, in other news, Democrats have won special elections in Pennsylvania. Democrats in Pennsylvania have won two special elections for the state house, keeping their majority intact. Democrats Anna Turbrico and Jennifer Mazzucco won their elections to represent Pennsylvania House Districts 22 in Lehigh County and 42 in Allegheny County. Both seats were vacated by Democrats, of course, but they were expected to remain that way. But there was a risk tied to a possible tie in the state house that could have been 100 to 100 if both of these seats ended up flipping Republican. Of course, that was a very low chance. This is, of course, good news if these lawmakers do their jobs, right? We need lawmakers in office who are going to solve problems, who are going to lead this country, and who are going to rebuild this country into a better place. Bottom line is, the things that we need for lawmakers going into these midterms, they need to say that they are going to defund ICE. They need to say that they are going to prosecute people for the Epstein files, and they need to say that they are going to work to remove this administration from office. Those are the three things at the very least, right? Because the majority of Americans are kind of recognizing that we fucked ourselves in the last election. And I couldn't vote in that last election, but I wouldn't have voted for Donald Trump because I knew that that was going to be a bad choice. A lot of people knew that that was going to be a bad choice. And unfortunately, people are too dumb in this country to recognize that, right? Um, I mean, we got a lot of problems in this country, and if we want to fix those problems, we need lawmakers who are going to fix those problems. We don't need lawmakers who are going to sit around, keep things the status quo, like we've seen from Democrats all throughout these years. People like Gavin Newsom, people like Chuck Schumer. I'm blanking all of the Democratic names for some reason now that I actually have to think about them, right? But all these people who are considered the establishment Democrats, right? They're not going to do anything to help this country in its future. They are not going to do anything to move this country forward. They are not going to do anything to help you. They are focused on keeping this country the way it is. And that's not what we need. I think a majority of Americans recognize that at this point. We need a country that supports the working class. We need a country that helps the people living here. There are so many things that the American people need that we have been deprived of for a very long time at this point, right? And something needs to change about that. That's why we need lawmakers in office who are going to change that. Because if we don't do it now, it's very likely that it's not going to change for another 50 years. This is an opportunity we have now. We've been in a shithole for the past 50 years. We need to get ourselves out now, right? And this is an opportunity to rebuild the country, a country that has historically, in theory, the United States is such a great idea. Land of the free, home of the brave. You get to be who you are and, live your life the way you want. But the country isn't like that, right? It's not been like that for a very long time. And that's a country that we should strive to be. The idea that the founding fathers presented in theory is a great idea. And I think that the country should be like that. But, the way that we have gone about being the United States, the way we have gone about being the land of the free, the way we have gone about, being, all of these other labels and titles, that we are supposed to be, right? It hasn't worked out in our favor. In fact, it's worked out pretty much the opposite of that. And it's about time we put people into office. It's about time we, get people in who are going to do things the correct way. In other news, this is a really big deal as the Cuban government has killed people on an American boat after it violated territorial waters. Cuba's Ministry of Interior has announced that its Border Patrol forces engaged with a speedboat from the United States that led to a shootout, killing four. In a statement on social media, they said, in early hours of this February 25th, 2026, a fast acting vessel was detected within Cuban territorial waters with the registration from Florida. United States, with the registration number FL7726SH, which approached 1 nautical mile northeast of the Canal El Pino in Cayo Falcones, Corlando municipality, Villa Clara province. My Spanish is not the greatest, but I tried there a little bit. It's not the worst language for me. In other news, as a result of the approach to the surface, the unit from the border guard troops of the Ministry of Interior, with 5 combatants to identify the vessel, fired at the Cuban personnel, causing the commander of the Cuban vessel to be injured. As consequence of the confrontation, by this time, the information was closed. 4 aggressors were killed, 6 were injured, who were evacuated and received medical assistance. In light of the current challenges, Cuba reaffirms its willingness to protect its territorial waters based on the fact that national defense is a fundamental pillar of the Cuban state in favor of its protecting its sovereignty and stability in the region. Investigations continue by the competent authorities for the full clarifications of the facts. I will not be shocked if this leads to a conflict. Unfortunately, Trump has, already been very clear that he has interest in taking Cuba, right? But this is not Cuba's fault, and don't let the administration spin it that way, because I wouldn't be shocked if they do. I don't believe Trump has made a comment. Let's check his True Social right now to see if he has. By the looks of it, he has not at all. Trump has not made a comment on this at all. The last one he made was an endorsement for some Jeff Ellington. But he hasn't said anything about this, right? And I wouldn't be shocked if when he does, because he has to, right? They killed Americans, right? That he tries to spin this on the Cuban government. And, at the end of the day, they were protecting their territorial waters, which they have every single right to do, especially when it comes to enemies from countries like the United States. And not to mention, these people also shot and injured a leader of the Cuban Border Patrol forces, right? I mean, they had every single right to do what they did here, and it is the full fault of the Americans for this. I mean, this one is on the people who were on the boat, and I don't know what they expected. They fucked around and they found out. Which, what did they expect to happen? You don't just shoot at people and not get shot back at. You don't just go into a country's territorial waters and not, get confronted on that, right? There are things that go into this, and very clearly, like, Cuba is not going to give a shit, right? They are going to act in defense of their own country. I mean, they are not fond of the United States at all. We have done terrible things to that country. We continue to do terrible things to that country, right? But I would not be shocked if, one, these people end up in some sort of prison. I mean, they attacked Cuban forces. They are going to end up in some form of prison, right? And then it is going to lead to Trump being upset because Americans are being held captive. Whatever term he uses for that, I don't know. It probably will be like a hostage or something, right? This is just my assumption of how this is going to play out. Trump is going to be upset about that. He's going to say, you need to let these people go. You need to let them go, or we are going to fight you. We are going to invade you. Cuba is going to say no, probably. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they'll say yes, but they're not really fond of the United States. So I highly doubt that unless they get like something in return, right? Trump is going to be like, well, we're going to invade you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. And it's going to be a whole ordeal. I would not be shocked at all if we see a conflict here, because I mean, at the end of the day, this administration already very clearly wants to take as much territory as possible. And in any way they can use to justify it, they will, right? And I really do think that, whether it was justified or not for Cuba to do this, the Trump administration does not care, and they are going to take an opportunity where they see it. We saw it in Venezuela, where they essentially, took the country's president in the middle of the night, invaded the country, all of that. And they've already threatened Cuba. It's one of the many countries that they have threatened. It's I won't be shocked, and I don't think anyone else will be. Anyways, moving on into our final topic for tonight, I want to talk about Abigail Spanberger's response for Trump's address to the union. Of course, she led the Democratic response this year. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I did not watch this live. I've seen a few clips of it, but for the most part, it was just me reading articles compared to the Trump speech. Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger delivered the Democratic response to the Trump State of the Union this year, accusing him of increasing the cost of living, undermining public safety, enriching himself while in office. She touched on the struggles with farmers and their issues with the tariffs, and the struggles on the soybean industry, and all the other issues they have with ICE and their operations, including the children who are being detained by ICE. The American citizens who have been shot and killed by ICE, the people who have been killed by ICE, and a list of other things. Essentially, she said everything the Trump administration was doing was bad. And I'm gonna be real, like I said, didn't watch the speech, just read a few articles on it. But like, really, nobody is reporting on this because nothing came out of it, right? Once again, Democrats really did not do any better than Trump here. They denounced him. They said his policies were bad. They gave reasons why, but the American people know this already, and that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for you to tell us things that we already know. We're looking for leadership. We're looking for opportunity. We are looking for people who are going to give us a plan for where this country can go and where this country will go, right? Because we're in the shitter right now. I mean, at the end of the day, that's just a fact. We are not looking so great right now in this country, right? And I don't think what people want from Democratic lawmakers right now is for them to continue to tell us that the things that Trump is doing is bad. We've heard that enough over the past year. We don't need to hear it anymore. They don't need to keep telling us this time and time again because we already know we are not that dumb. For some reason, they think Americans are that dumb still, but a majority of the Americans who are not supporting Trump at this point are not that dumb, guys. And it becomes a time where there are things that you can do better. And, going out there and denouncing the president is just not the best thing you can be doing right now. That shows absolutely nothing. All it does is say, yeah, you're bad, but it doesn't say what you're going to do about it. Actions speak louder than words. Democrats could have used this time to, lay out a plan for midterms if they win. They could have told the American people what they plan to do if they win the midterms. Like I said at the start of the video, they could have laid out their plans to impeach Trump. They could have laid out their plans to abolish ICE. They could have laid out their plans, to, target people and prosecute people for the Epstein files. Bare minimum, right? But they didn't do that. Instead, they denounced Trump and they said that he was bad, which does absolutely nothing and does not help the American people, does not reassure the American people, does not provide anything to the American people, right? I mean, it would have been amazing, to hear those Democratic lawmakers talk about things that they plan to do if they win the midterms, because Trump very clearly is not talking about his plans to lead the country. And that's what the American people are looking for. And it's what the majority of the American people would really appreciate right now. But they didn't, because just like always, it seems they don't care as much as they want you to think. With that being said, though, thank you everyone for watching today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed. It has definitely been a very interesting day in the news world, that is for sure. If you're new here, though, please consider subscribing. All the support would be greatly appreciated, as we are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube by this summer. If you're on Substack, please consider subscribing as well. It's $8 a month, and all funds go to me. Helps me pay for the things that I need to pay for in my life, like my groceries, clothing, and all of that. I want to give a huge shout out to our paid subscribers on Substack in Sean Zone and Nan. Thank you all so much. It means the world to me that you guys continue to support my work. And outside of that, I think that's all I have for today's episode. So thank you guys. And I will see you all in tomorrow.